In September 1943, you first need to understand what the Italian campaign was and what it cost. After the Allied victory in North Africa and the successful invasion of Sicily, the decision was made to push north into the Italian mainland. Military planners called it the soft underbelly of Europe. They were wrong. Catastrophically, exhaustingly wrong. Italy was not a soft underbelly, it was a spine. A geological spine of mountains, rivers, and narrow valleys that turned every mile of advance into a separate battle. The Germans knew this. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, one of the most gifted defensive commanders in the history of warfare, had studied every ridge, every river crossing, every hilltop village. He turned Italy into a killing ground. By September 1943, the Allied Fifth Army under General Mark Clark had just completed Operation Avalanche, the amphibious landing at Salerno. It was one of the most dangerous moments of the entire war. German panzer divisions came within hours of pushing the Allies back into the sea. They didn't, but the cost was enormous. And now, as the Fifth Army attempted to push inland, they encountered one of Kesselring's most brutally effective tools: the fortified hilltop strongpoint. Villages perched on high ground turned into interlocking fields of fire, defended by soldiers who had been fighting since Poland, since France, since North Africa. One of these villages was Altavilla Silentina, a small, ancient town sitting on a ridge approximately 30 kilometers southeast of Salerno. From its heights, German observers could see for miles. From its streets, German machine guns could control every approach. The 36th Infantry Division, the Texas Army National Guard, known as the T-Patchers, was ordered to take it. They would take it, lose it, take it again, lose it again. And it was in this brutal, grinding back and forth that one man would make a decision that still echoes through the history of military valor. His name was Charles Ernest Kelly, and the Army called him Commando. Charles Kelly was not born to be celebrated. He was born on September 23, 1920, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The son of a working-class family, he grew up during the Great Depression when men learned early that survival was not given, it was taken. With your hands, with your will, with whatever you had. He was, by most accounts, a difficult young man, restless, stubborn, the kind of person that polite society didn't quite know what to do with. He worked mill jobs, he moved around, he had what you might charitably call a complicated relationship with authority. But he was also fiercely, almost recklessly brave, the kind of brave that doesn't perform for an audience, the kind that simply acts before the brain has time to send the memo about self-preservation. When the war came, Kelly enlisted. He was assigned to the 36th Infantry Division, and he took to soldiering the way some men take to their true calling, not because he loved war, but because war finally gave full expression to something inside him that peacetime had never accommodated. His fellow soldiers nicknamed him Commando after the elite British Special Forces units making headlines for their daring raids. It was a name given half in jest, half in genuine recognition of the fact that Kelly operated on a different frequency than most men. He wasn't reckless, he was precise in his aggression. There is a difference. Reckless men die early and uselessly. Precise men like Kelly survive long enough to change the course of a battle. By the time the 36th Division waded ashore at Salerno on the morning of September 9, 1943, Technical Sergeant Charles Kelly had already been tested. He was not untested clay, he was tempered steel. But nothing had tested him like what was coming. Altavilla Silentina sits at approximately 450 meters above sea level. In peaceful times, it would be beautiful. White stone buildings, sweeping views of the valley below, ancient olive groves cascading down the slopes. In September 1943, it was a nightmare. The Germans had turned it into a fortress, machine gun nests in every ruin, mortar teams concealed in the olive groves, observation posts on every high point feeding coordinates back to artillery batteries hidden miles away. The approaches were mined, the streets were pre-registered by artillery, every intersection, every doorway, every open square already marked on German targeting maps. The 36th Division attacked Altavilla on September 11th. they took it at tremendous cost. German counterattacks began almost immediately. By September 12th, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Germans understood the strategic value of that ridge with a clarity that was ruthless and total. Lose Altavilla, and Allied artillery observers could direct fire across the entire German defensive network in the region. Hold Altavilla, and the Allied advance stalled, bled white on the approaches. Kesselring committed significant forces to retaking it. Not a probing attack, a concentrated multi-battalion assault designed to overwhelm the American defenders and push them off the ridge entirely. By the evening of September 13th, the situation reached its crisis point. It is Monday, September 13th, 1943. Dawn is breaking, pale, cold, and gray over the Campagna hills. But there is no peace in this sunrise. There is only the sound of engines and boots, and the distinctive mechanical chatter of German MG-42 machine guns, the fastest-firing infantry weapon in the world, capable of 1,200 rounds per minute, a sound so distinctive that American soldiers called it Hitler's baw saw. Kelly and a small group of American soldiers have been cut off, completely, totally, without ambiguity. The Germans are not probing, they are not testing, they are executing a deliberate encirclement, a Kessel in German military terminology, a cauldron. 600 soldiers, infantry supported by armored elements, closing the ring with the methodical efficiency that made the Wehrmacht so terrifying an opponent throughout the war. 600 men against a handful, a single squad, a sergeant and whoever was still standing. The mathematics of this situation were not subtle. They did not require a staff college education to understand. They required only eyes and the ability to count. What do you do in this moment? You can surrender. Hands up, rifle down, step into the road, and hope the men closing in on you are the kind of soldiers who take prisoners. Some were, some weren't. In the chaos of a German counterattack, at dawn on a contested hillside, those odds were not comforting. You can attempt to break out, fight your way through the ring, accept the casualties of an escape attempt through 600 prepared defenders. Against those odds, with your flanks collapsed, this was not a plan. It was a different kind of surrender, a noisier one. Or you can reach for the radio. Kelly reached for the radio. What happens in a human mind in the seconds before a decision like this? Military psychologists have studied the phenomenon for decades. When men are pushed beyond the normal survival calculus, when every rational option has been exhausted, something shifts. The higher cognitive functions that specialize in self-preservation step back. Something older, something more fundamental takes over. Call it duty. Call it love for the men beside you. Call it the complete and total merger of a man's identity with his mission to the point where the distinction between his survival and their survival ceases to exist as a meaningful category. Whatever you call it, Kelly was there. He picked up the handset, he keyed the radio, and in a voice that by all subsequent accounts was calm, devastatingly, almost unnervingly calm, he read out the fire mission. He gave the coordinates, his own coordinates. The grid reference of the position he was standing on, the stone building, the rubble pile, the patch of Italian hillside where he and his men were making their last stand. He gave that location to the artillery, and he asked them to fire on it. On the other end of that radio, there were men who understood exactly what they were being asked to do. Artillery officers are not naive. When a forward observer gives coordinates and those coordinates match the reported position of friendly forces, alarms go off. Procedures exist. Questions are asked. Are you sure of your position? Confirm grid reference. Do you understand the effect of fire at this location? Kelly confirmed. Again, with a clarity that eliminated all doubt. He knew exactly where he was. He knew exactly what he was asking for. And he was asking for it anyway, with full understanding of what the answer would mean. The shells came in. Artillery at proximity is not like anything the movies prepare you for. It is not dramatic in the cinematic sense. It is geological. The ground itself convulses. The air becomes a physical force, a wall that moves through you rather than past you. Sound ceases to be sound and becomes instead a pressure event, a physiological experience that overrides every other sensory signal the human body is capable of generating. Stone walls that had stood for centuries simply ceased to exist. The olive trees shredded, the terraced fields erupted, and in the middle of it, pressed flat against whatever cover he had found, was Kelly. The artillery broke the German assault. 600 men, coordinated, well-equipped, executing a deliberate encirclement, were disrupted. Not by a relief force, not by air support, not by a sudden change in the tactical odds, by one man's willingness to stand inside the storm instead of running from it. The shells fell across the German approach routes. The coordinated assault fragmented into disorder. Units lost cohesion. Commanders lost situational awareness. The encirclement, which had been closing with terrible precision, cracked open. And Kelly survived. Not unscathed, not unchanged, but alive. The precise geometry of artillery impact zones is unforgiving to mathematics, but occasionally merciful to individuals. The man who calls fire on his own position is betting that the natural dispersion of artillery rounds, which never fall perfectly centered but spread across an elliptical pattern, will fall more heavily on him than on him. It is not a certainty. It is a prayer backed by calculation. On September 13, 1943, the prayer was answered. But the day was not over, because Charles Kelly, the man who had just called artillery onto himself, did not stop fighting. He engaged enemy soldiers at close range with his rifle until the ammunition was gone. He threw ammunition boxes at enemy soldiers when he had nothing left to throw. He fought through buildings, across rooftops, through streets measured in meters and contested in blood. He kept fighting until there was nothing left to fight. On January 13, 1944, exactly 4 months after the battle, President Franklin D. Roosevelt presented Technical Sergeant Charles E. Kelly with the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration the United States can bestow upon one of its soldiers. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at risk of life above and beyond the call of duty in action with the enemy near Altavilla, Italy, 13 September 1943. Kelly came home a hero. Pittsburgh gave him a parade. The nation, still deep in the war, needed stories like his, needed evidence that ordinary men could do extraordinary things, that the human capacity for courage was not exhausted, not theoretical, but real and present and walking among them in uniform. He struggled after the war. The adjustment was genuinely difficult. The man who had been incandescent under pressure found peacetime's slower burn more difficult to navigate. He lived the complex, full, imperfect life of a man who had been, for one morning in September 1943, something close to superhuman. He died in 1985 in Pittsburgh, the city that had made him. He was 64 years old. The act of calling artillery fire on one's own position is known in modern military doctrine as a danger-close fire mission. It is formally defined as any artillery, mortar, or air support requested within 600 meters of friendly forces, a threshold that exists because the natural dispersion of artillery rounds makes anything closer statistically hazardous to the men requesting it. Statistically hazardous. That is the bureaucratic language the Army uses for what Kelly did on September 13, 1943. What it means in practice is that you are asking for fire in a zone where the mathematical reality of ballistic physics means that some rounds will fall among your own men. The question is whether more rounds fall among the enemy, whether the disruption to them outweighs the disruption to you. Whether, in the cold calculus of combat mathematics, your call produces a net positive outcome, even if the net positive is measured in other men's survival rather than your own. Kelly understood this. He had the technical knowledge to make the calculation and the moral fortitude to accept its implications. This combination, technical competence plus supreme courage, is rarer than either quality alone. The Battle of Altavilla Silentina was one engagement, a footnote in the vast, bloody calculus of the Italian campaign. The campaign itself would grind on until May 2, 1945, over 300,000 Allied casualties before it was done. But Altavilla held. the 36th Division held the ridge, and the artillery coordinates that Charles Kelly read into a radio handset in the gray dawn of September 13, 1943, represented a tiny, crucial, irreplaceable tipping point in that holding action. A single man's decision, rippling outward. The ridge held, the flanks secured, the advance continued. Other men who will never know his name lived because of what he did. This is how history actually works, not in the broad strokes of commanders and strategy maps, but in the granular, gritty, individual moments of soldiers in rubble, making decisions that no one above them ordered and no doctrine fully prepared them for. The hills above Altavilla Silentina are silent now. The olive groves have grown back. The stone buildings have been rebuilt or replaced or left as ruins that children play among without knowing what they are. The roads that German infantry used to approach through the early morning mist of September 13, 1943, now carry farm trucks and tourist cars.
There is no artillery anymore, no radio calls, no coordinates read into a handset by a Pittsburgh steelworker turned soldier betting his life on the mathematics of dispersion. Just hills, just wind, just the long, gentle silence that follows when the killing stops. We tell stories like this one not to glorify war. War is not glorious. Anyone who has actually been in one will tell you that with a vehemence that doesn't require elaboration. War is mud and fear and the unimaginable weight of loss. War is the thing that leaves marks on men that no medal can cover and no parade can heal. We tell this story because within the horror of war, human beings still do this. They still pick up the radio. They still read the coordinates. They still stand in the path of the storm and say, "Here. Come here. I am here. Come to me." Not for glory, not for the medal that comes afterward, for the men in the foxhole beside them, for something that in the moment of decision was simply and completely worth more than their own continued existence. Technical Sergeant Charles Ernest Kelly was not a perfect man. No man is. He was a difficult, restless, complicated Pittsburgh kid who found his true scale in the worst circumstances imaginable and rose to meet them in a way that most human beings never will and never have to. But he did one thing, one definitive, irreducible, completely extraordinary thing that places him permanently in a category beyond ordinary courage. He called the fire on himself so that others would live. There will always be those who wonder what they would do, in the foxhole, surrounded, out of options, radio in hand. Most of us will never know. Charles Kelly knew, and on a September morning in the hills of southern Italy, with 600 enemies closing in, and a radio handset slick with mud and sweat, he answered that question the only way it can be answered. Not with words, with action. Technical Sergeant Charles E. Kelly, Medal of Honor recipient. Born September 23, 1920, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Action, September 13, 1943, Altavilla Silentina, Italy. Medal presented January 13, 1944, by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Died 1985, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.